There's a question that's been nagging at a lot of people running service-based businesses right now. If AI can spin up a data pipeline, generate a plausible infrastructure assessment, or produce a 10-page analytics report, what exactly are clients still paying for? In this episode, I'm joined again by Ross Katz, Principal Data Science Lead at Cordine, and we come at that question from two different angles. Ross from the data services side, and me from the marketing agency world. What we find is that the answer isn't really about AI capability at all. It's about three things: whether a client can tell if the work is right, whether they can recover when it goes wrong, and whether the work compounds on a foundation that actually holds. We also get into what's happening to the agency model, why the old pyramid is collapsing, why boutique expertise is becoming more valuable, not less, and why the trust problem for service providers has quietly gotten harder even as the tools have gotten better. Plus, value-based pricing, and whether AI subsidies are a ticking clock or an overblown concern. Let's get into it. So Ross, on this topic, when AI makes good enough available to everybody, what's left for experts like you and I that are offering professional, managed, and technical services?
Yeah, so, I think before we determine what's left for us to do, we kind of have to identify what do we mean when we say good enough? Basically, at the highest possible level, my viewpoint is that what AI does that consultancies no longer do is a product of, roughly three ideas. The first is who's doing the verification, or how verifiable or legible is the thing to the client or to the person who's doing the building. So, the build me a brochure website for 25 grand or whatever agency, that's dying, because you can build a website by yourself over a weekend that's as good as the website that one of those companies would have done, call it 5-10 years ago. But one of the reasons for that is that, as the client, you're the one looking at the website and saying, this is good enough. This is what I I can tell that this is what I want, or I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. Can you make this a little bit different? And, if you're able to do that, then you can already tell ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini to do the thing, and it does the thing for you. The second thing to consider that I think impacts my business as a data science consultant, and then your business also as a podcast production forward marketing agency, is how recoverable is the error is inevitably going to get introduced into the thing. So, using that website as an example, if there's an error on the website, it's not unless you are saying something that is just far beyond the pale from which you can never recover from a PR perspective. If your design or your branding's a little off, nobody's really going to notice. You're going to be the one who notices first, typically. So you can recover from that. But, if your data pipeline fails, if your production software system fails, if your legal document that you submitted to court is way off base, you cannot recover from that. You get roughly 1, maybe 2 shots at it, and you got to get it right. So you can't afford to experiment. And what these AI tools are basically doing is making it easy for you to experiment and iterate, which you can then verify what you've gotten back. So if you're not able to recover from an error, then, that's really good for people who do consulting type work, because they're the people who have the expertise to avoid the errors on the first try. And then the last thing I would think about, in terms of good enough, is whether the work kind of compounds on itself. And there's two ways to think about this. Do you need to build on a solid foundation that accrues value over time, and you need help to solidify that foundation and ensure that it is the right foundation for you over the long term? Okay. Well, you might want to invest in the expertise that ensures that foundation is really great. I don't see a lot of people. I mean, some people do, but even people who are sort of Mr. or Mrs. Fix-It in their homes, not a lot of them are pouring the concrete or standing up the entire edifice of the house itself. They're sort of fixing things around the edges. What you want in that case is someone who you trust, who has the expertise, who's going to do it right. Because if your house falls down, once again, that's not recoverable. And maybe you don't know what a cracked foundation looks like, but I can tell you that somebody who's poured a million foundations knows exactly what a foundation looks like when it's been done wrong. So like that's how I would classify good enough. And I think if you think that through, it sort of draws the boundaries of where people are going to in-house a lot of stuff using AI and where they're going to continue to seek for external expertise to complement their teams to like deliver something that's really good on that first try.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. And I mean, like, as you mentioned, we're kind of coming at this from similar but different angles. You know, you and Cordine from the kind of data services side of things. And, you know, from my side, you know, as a kind of marketing creative agency, I know I can talk to the kind of boundaries that exist within that kind of creative field. But I'm not sure that's all that interesting to this particular audience.
I'm interested in it. What will you tell me? Like, what inside of the the marketing agency field? What are you seeing in terms of where agency work is continuing to grow, and where are you seeing it sort of shrinking and dying away? And like, how do you think about that from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the future of the creative marketing agency model is one that, well, look, I mean, I think about it like this. Historically, agencies have been built on this kind of idea of a pyramid, right? So you've got kind of like leadership up at the top point, then you've got kind of like a wider rung of middle managers, and then you have this like super large rung of like juniors and like entrants to the market that are doing all of the kind of grunt work. And that has born from it these agencies that grow to, you know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 250 people. And those agencies have been able to not just survive and thrive because you've needed that quantity of people in order to deliver that kind of quantity and quality of work. What AI is now doing is it's more or less removing the need for that bottom rung, which, you know, is a whole other podcast episode in itself, and what that says about the workforce and who's going to replace us when we all retire and, you know, yada, yada, yada. It's somewhat, you know, forcing the middle rung to kind of retrain and adapt and figure out, okay, you know, how do we then now do the work of that junior rung, but not actually have to do the work, but have these tools create leverage for us to do that work, and then leadership kind of running the show at the top. And so I think the kind of, you know, future of this marketing agency model is where we have far fewer large agencies when it comes to headcount, um, but far more agencies in terms of just volume of shops. But those shops become uber specialist, right? Like micro agencies that kind of like dial in on one area of kind of strategic expertise, whether that is, you know, content strategy or, you know, sales enablement, or, you know, pick your kind of marketing channel or function of choice. And they are then leveraging, you know, these tools that are available to them to execute on the grunt work. To put this into kind of practical terms, if you think about it as like a blog writing agency, the process would typically go: brief comes in from client, we need brochure X. Step one, step two, marketing assistant goes away and performs a bunch of research off the back of that brief. What's the industry saying? Pull some quotes, pull some stats, etc. That research then gets handed over to a copywriter in step three. That copywriter writes the post. That copywriter hands off that step four to an editor to do the review. The review is then approved. Step five goes to client. Step six, everything is finalized and signed off. AI can do all of that, but where it shouldn't be touching is the secret sauce, which is the step three, the writing bit, right? AI can take and analyze a brief. AI can, you know, run research against that brief and prepare a report. It can then hand that to a human copywriter to create something that is human, you know, net new in terms of thought leadership, perspective, point of view, etc. And then AI can then pick up the baton once the copyright is finished to do, you know, help the writer do the editing, and then do all the handoff and approval process with the client. And so I think that is where the boundaries kind of start to become clearer in a world of AI. You know, they are for the people who can bring that kind of strategic expertise that touches on your kind of 3 points, right? The verify, recoverable, and creating work that compounds. You want someone who's been around the houses, been around the block, who can bring that to the equation, but then provide you cost efficiencies, time efficiencies, and improvement in quality of work by leveraging all of these kind of, tools and assets that are available to them.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing you talk, it brings up an idea that I've been kind of chewing on as well, which is sort of that and I love your thesis about like sort of the reemergence of niche, of boutique expertise and the ability for that to outperform sort of the large generalist firms. I would say that that is as true, in my opinion, in data services as it is in the marketing space, because sort of the value of the expertise it goes up as the generality of the work goes down. So like, and it's worth thinking about that from the perspective of like the large language models themselves. Like these things have been trained on the entire internet. So like if AI has seen millions of examples of the exact thing you want to do, like it's going to do a really great job at it. But if it hasn't seen the particular tailored language specific, topic specific, domain specific blog post that you want to write from the point of view of your organization, like that's not something that AI is going to be able to do for you unless you basically write the blog post for it, which is the second idea, is like, the specification costs. The more specific you need to be, the more deeply you have to prompt AI in order to give you the thing that you're asking it for, which comes back to the verifiability idea that we had before. Like you need to be able to spot the gaps in what it's given you, because you understand sort of what that ideal state looks like. And like if you do this over the course of years, of decades, then you're getting that defensible domain expertise that AI isn't going to be able to take it away from you, because ultimately, like, you've delivered outcomes, and like all AI can deliver, at least right now, is like the output that you're asking it for. Now, this takes a lot of like really craft oriented attention to detail, cultivation of expertise from the perspective of the data services consultancy or the marketing agency or the professional services firm. But I also view that as an area where over the long term, agency type work is going to continue to retain its value, even as AI continues to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk about this concept with my team about this technical proficiency gap, and how, for the entirety of our careers, if we as marketers have wanted to go ahead and, create a website or design a really great looking brochure, or, do something that required a certain degree of technical skill, you would need to go and find someone with that skill. You need to hire a freelancer developer. You need to bring someone in house. You need to train that skill set internally before you could actually do the thing. Whereas now, that technical proficiency gap, at least in marketing world, is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so now, where a lot of marketers that I speak to see this as a moment of fear, like AI is coming for our jobs, I see it as a moment of opportunity, because as long as you have a creative mind, as long as you have taste, as long as you have expertise in like the fundamentals of marketing, right? So, storytelling and, positioning, you then don't need to be technical, in any of these skills in order to then make an output a reality. You can prompted something into existence. You can take that ball of clay and stick it onto the board, add natural language. You can then just mold it into what you see as being the kind of ideal crystallized output for the end client. And that to me feels great. I think what the challenge then becomes for us as service operators is, with everything moving so fast, how do we evolve our offerings and our businesses to meet what are growing demands from clients. I talk a lot about this idea of the iron triangle. You can have things, cheap, fast, and good, but you can only have two of those things. And I think these tools that are becoming ubiquitous, right? Like with our day-to-day professional lives, are conditioning clients to at least now think that they can have all three of those things and they can have them all the time. And so, how is that changing, I guess, from your perspective, what you're seeing clients coming to you with when they're coming to, embark on a service from Quarto?
Basically, what people are asking us for hasn't really changed, but I think that's also because of the nature of our work. Like, our work is so deeply connected to like AI and the kind of work that people do. Like, people still need sort of the same data infrastructure, data foundations that they needed previously. It's just that the value of those relative people see the value of building that up sooner in their organization's journey, or more comprehensively in their organization's journey. And so that's why we're seeing more demand for our services, but it hasn't really changed the nature of the conversation. But like, what it has changed is sort of the bar for trust that people have. It used to be that, when you make a mistake, people kind of understand, like, you're doing the best you can. You get one mistake, and then, if you make that one mistake, then, like, just don't make the same mistake twice. But now, with sort of the availability of AI, people have this illusion, to your point, about sort of like cost, quality, and speed, which basically says that, like, even though we've given you something of a very high quality at very high speed, at a reasonable cost, if there's anything wrong with it, there's always the question of, well, would AI alone have done it better? And I think what's happened from my perspective is that the cost part of this triangle is really where the illusions are. Because, like, if you prompt Claude or ChatGPT to build you a house, it might build you a great looking house. Like, I want the sink over there, I want the toilet over there, I want the oven over there. But you're not going to know until you live in that house for 2 years that actually there are fundamental issues with the house. Like, we have to like basically rebuild this house from scratch in order to fix the fundamental issues that are there. And so the speed with which everyone's moving to build sort of hides the cost in the future. It seems inexpensive right now, but like, the bill will come due at some point. And so, my challenge as, sort of an expert services provider, is to help people see what the risks are. Because fundamentally, like, we're in trust-based businesses. Like, the reason they come to me rather than going to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini is because, like, we have built up trust with our existing clients, and we have built up a portfolio of assets that attempts to demonstrate that we are trustworthy to new clients. And all of the signals that people used to use to understand whether you were trustworthy was basically like, is this output that you're showing me correct? People always used to ask me to send them like an example of the document that I produced from the assessment engagement I did on somebody else's data infrastructure. But the value of that document is rapidly approaching zero, because I could have prompted, a plausible document into existence. So that shifts sort of the burden on to services providers like us to find other means of demonstrating our trustworthiness through, like, our communication, through the processes that we engage in with our clients, especially when we're just starting, through the relationships that we build, through, like, the way that we're able to speak intelligently to their businesses. And so, and like, fundamentally, like, and this has been something that SaaS platforms have been trying to do for as long as SaaS platforms exist. Like, everyone's trying to productize trust. Everyone wants to become the automated platform that people trust, because then you don't have to worry about the relationship, and you don't have to worry about the processes, and you don't have to worry about, like, the people problems that inevitably crop up. But fundamentally, like, at the end of the day, we trust human beings, to, especially experts, to have their incentives aligned with us and to be with us for the long haul. And so that's what we're trying to architect Cordon to be, is that partner to our clients that demonstrates every step of the way that we're with you for the long haul, and sort of builds that trust while showing you, this is how we're building you for the long term, rather than doing the expedient thing in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah, that the idea of trust is so important. And, certainly I think in and again in a marketing context, coming back to where are we seeing shifts, like the cost of content production is increasingly becoming more and more commoditized. Not the cost, the delivery of content production is becoming increasingly commoditized, but particularly the written word. And I definitely sense when speaking to clients, or prospects for the first time, this kind of, probing mentality around, is what you're showing, is what you're talking to me about results that you've delivered or work that you've delivered actually you, right? Or is it these tools that you're using? But then in the same breath, there's the expectation around you're using these tools because they're looking for those cost efficiencies and the better quality of work and, the kind of speed of delivery. And so I think what I'm feeling is still this kind of like interesting point of tension where these prospects are expecting you to use these tools, but they're also still wanting to not just feel these tools all the work is being delegated to those tools, because then the question is, well, then what am I paying for? Like, why don't I just, do it myself? And like trying to rationalize that tension and, continue to build trust with prospects that maybe haven't heard of you or don't know of you or haven't come in through a referral is something that I'm still trying to kind of figure out. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Our outlook on this is basically like deliver value every step of the way. Some from that first meeting, we're just trying to we're trying to help people understand the nature of their problem. And if you walk away from that first conversation like with two ideas, one is I understand my problem better than I did before, and two is I'd really like to have another conversation with those people because they seem to know what they're talking about and they can probably help me to reduce the amount of time that I have to invest in this process or the amount of resources that I have to invest in this process. Like that's, reasonable way of approaching it. But fundamentally, like, as a services provider, you can't skip steps. So what I try to do with our clients and with our prospective clients is, show our work, because AI is making us more effective. I believe that. I believe that AI tools are helping us to do more on behalf of our clients. Like that hour that I used to invest was a less productive hour than the hour that I invest now. And, I think our clients are seeing the benefit of that. Now, is the only benefit of that a reduction in cost? No, because fundamentally like what we are doing is investing our time and attention to get our clients the outcomes that they're looking for. And what I think we're getting is more value, which is to say higher quality outcomes at a price that justifies those outcomes, with more value going to our clients than we ever have before. How to do that is, I think, at least for me right now, more art than science. It's like, yes, I produced this 9-page document that was AI assisted with it, but rather than having me at 10 p.m. at night, pounding keys to get stuff out, what you got was me reviewing that document 10 consecutive times to make sure we were bulletproof on everything that we're recommending and on like the exact and why we're making these decisions, and a more comprehensive set of criteria that we're using to evaluate it, and better research inputs that allow us to evaluate more tools than we ever would have had have been able to evaluate previously. And so, I think the work still speaks for itself, but only if you tell the story of what you're doing and why. And that's like the art. That's like what we're trying to practice, but that we're not always perfect at, but we'll be better next week than we were this week.
I had an interesting conversation with a kind of CEO leadership group that I'm part of, in marketing agency land, and a lot of the founders across the table from me who are running these marketing agencies, started them with time-based pricing. So give us an hour, we'll give you an hour of account manager, blog writer, and assistant, and it's going to cost this much, and every extra hour is going to be the same. The conversation we had a couple of weeks ago was, is this new landscape forcing a move from service operators into a world of value-based pricing? At B2B Better, we've always kind of operated with that kind of model. It's always just kind of made sense to me, right from the get-go, as being an in-house marketer my whole career and then setting up my own agency for the first time. But I know it's not the norm for a lot of service providers. your thoughts on that, and how kind of the commercials will evolve for service operators over time in this new world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard problem because, clients understandably are trying to get the most value they can from the money that they're investing with their services providers. And so I see that, I acknowledge that. I think that's exactly what they should be doing. I think that fundamentally it depends from the agency perspective on how repeatable your work is and how well you can estimate in advance how much work you're going to be able to do for each client, and how well you're going to be able to estimate in advance how much value you're going to be able to drive for each of those things. But some of the things that we develop, I mean, I can point to case studies that we have where the ROI was just some absurd number, like 10,000x. You invest you invest in 10 hours of our time, and what you get is something that is so much more valuable, is in the millions of dollars, just for those hours of our time. But could we have said in advance that we were only going to take, or that we were going to save you millions of dollars, and also could we have charged you $1 million for the $2 million that we saved you with the time that we invested? I think the answer is maybe not. So, from our perspective, and the research that I've seen out there is basically that, like, there hasn't been a lot of movement. There's been some movement toward value-based pricing, but there hasn't been a lot of movement yet. I think because of what I said earlier about basically what's happening is the hours that the consultants invest are now more productive hours. And so, fundamentally the economics just kind of works out, especially because of what we talked earlier in terms of what you do is you trust the institution to have the people in the seat who have the expertise to do the verification, to ensure that, that there aren't any errors that are unrecoverable, et cetera. I think hours-based pricing will persist for a long time. I think it's the right model for us because our work is diverse, and because it's hard for us to predict in advance what the cost basis is going to be for us and what the value basis is going to be for the client. But to the extent that you're in a services business where you can predict the value and you can predict the cost basis, I think value-based pricing makes a lot of sense and is objectively a better model. But there are a lot of people that would rather be in different business models than they are than they're in, and it's easier to brainstorm the potential for new business models than it is to actually change your business model, because there's a reason why business models are sticky. Like, once you have something that works, you don't want to risk everything trying to change the way that people pay you. Because also it's an education game too. If you're charging people 10 grand a value per value, then they're asking themselves, well, how much is this services organization actually spending to do that 10 grand? And if they're only spending $250 to get there, like, am I a sucker for paying for that service? Like, could I just do that for $2,000 rather than them doing it for $250? So it's always a fun game with services businesses. Like, there have been a lot of people who've been burned by services businesses, and so it comes back to what I said earlier about, like, does your model reinforce trust with clients, or does your model actively get in the way of building trust with clients? And so, like, we're trying to, like, we do all time and materials practically. We almost never do a fixed price project, because what we're trying to do is demonstrate value very quickly and give people the ability to walk away at any time. Because we don't want to have clients who aren't getting value from our work. We only want to have clients that are getting value from our work. So that's why we work the way we do. But it's harder than like, if you can get value-based pricing to work, then you should definitely do it.
Yeah. Final question for you, Ross, and I want you to kind of give me the answer to this, coming at it from two slightly different angles. So, for a service operator who's been listening to this episode and is trying to figure out, where do I stand in this new landscape in a world of AI? What questions should I be asking myself in terms of preserving my longevity and growing my business? That's the first part. The second part is, as a client coming into, a service operator, what kind of questions should you be asking, that firm, in the context of their business model and the impact that AI is having and the value that it can deliver to them. So let's start with the service operator themselves. What questions should they be asking as they navigate this new AI-driven landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question that most people are asking is, like, how do I restructure my processes around AI in order to make them more effective and more efficient? And, I think fundamentally it's, you can't take the process as it existed previously. You have to like reimagine the process with the capabilities that exist right now. And you have to build some time into your workflow for experimentation with the capabilities in order to determine whether AI can actually do the things that it's marketed as doing. Because there are a lot of vendors out there that will sell you the dream of what you wish AI could do. But ultimately, it's on you to suss out and ask difficult questions about, can like AI driven workflows actually do this thing for my company, and can it be integrated into my business in a way that makes us more efficient and effective and doesn't increase our volume while decreasing our quality? Because I think it's very easy to drown yourself in 20-page research reports that nobody has time to read, or outputs that nobody has time to check. And really the challenge is, where do you devote your precious expert attention in order to verify and validate that the things AI is giving you are the things that the things that you need? And then, if you're going to build it in-house, like, you need to build in time for that experimentation and iteration to continue to improve the way that you're doing things in a way that, morphs with the demands of the business and the demands of your clients. So that's high level where I would think from an agency perspective.
And now from a client's perspective, who's maybe coming in, let's just kind of look at it through the lens of, someone who's coming to speak to a data service provider like, or a kind of data consultancy like Cordine is, who's maybe, kind of already try to start building some of the solutions, themselves internally, and now they're coming to an expert like yourselves to help either carry them over the line or kind of build something that lasts. What kind of questions should they be asking you as a service operator, in the context of, your use of artificial intelligence and the workflows that you're developing?
I mean, I think asking how we use it is a reasonable question. Just understanding how it integrates with our workflow. Is it push button end to end, client gets output, or is it more of a personal enablement, or is it something in between? Like, what are the automated workflows we have internally? But fundamentally, the question that I want potential clients to be thinking about when they come and talk to us is, what is the value that you expect to get from data? And what do you know about your existing ecosystem that's either enabling you or preventing you from getting that value from your data? And then it's incumbent on us in the moment. There's a reason we start with a conversation and not with like a survey where you put in all of your information and then we spit out an AI generated recommendation based on the information you put in, is because, the iterative question asking aspect of what we do to try to fully understand your landscape, fully understand your domain, fully understand your strategic requirements and your functional needs, that process is human. It will respond in the moment. And so, what I said earlier about demonstrating value from the first call, that's what we're trying to do, is ask you the questions that get us the information we need in order to give you a set of recommendations on that first call that gets you where you need to go without, so that you can come talk to us when you do need a data services provider, or, go off and do it yourself. Because ultimately, like, we don't want to do work that you should be doing yourself. We want to build a relationship with you that means, when that time comes in the future where your business is growing gangbusters and you don't have enough data capacity internally to do what you need to do, you remember the people who gave you the right advice previously. And that's how we think about building trust over the long term.
Favorite segment of the Eventual Consistency episode, what we're watching. Ross, what have you been reading, watching, or learning about over the last week in data and AI?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, and this conversation has really touched on it, it's just been like a constant evolution of the build versus buy equation. And so I'm like constantly updating my viewpoint on, what is the current state of the data and AI landscape mean for the build versus buy equation, especially in the data tooling ecosystem, but also in pick your poison, website development, podcast production, whatever it is. And so, like, some of the things that I've been thinking about, there are a bunch of things you think about when you're doing a build versus buy analysis. There's like the total cost over the asset's lifetime. So not just the cost to build, but also how much does it cost you to maintain it or own it over the lifetime versus like the monthly fee that you pay to a vendor. And so obviously, like everybody knows, like building has gotten a lot cheaper on the front end. Does it have a lot of cost on the back end? And then there's like, what is the strategic differentiation that this thing that you're building, call it data infrastructure that you're building, like what is the strategic differentiation that it gives you? Like obviously if more things are buildable, then you might be inclined to build it. But if it's a strategic differentiator, you want to make sure it's built right. But also like if you have expert talent in-house, one of the things that's happened is because more things are buildable, you're now considering building even more things. So like that prioritization has become key, and where you assign your high quality talent from a build perspective is really important. So you might think this is not a strategic differentiator for us. We should buy it, even though I know that if we put our top developer on it, they could probably build the best possible thing for us. But what I want is the best possible version of the strategic differentiator, and that's where that person should be devoting their scarce attention. Then there's like the speed to value versus the speed of iteration. So like build is still like is faster if you have the talent and the attention to devote, but it's like human hours is like one of the ways to measure that speed. It's not just like raw days and months. Sometimes it's easier to just get the vendor onboarded and, plug it in. There's like the customization, the fit to the specific workflow. Like customization is now super cheap. Usually previously SaaS vendors were like super standardized, but now a lot of them are adding like that thin skin on top that allows you to customize it because you have the AI tools now. So like, maybe the vendor can fit even better than the thing you would build in-house, but like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not gonna go through all the things that I'm thinking about, but really what I want people to do and what's been on my mind is to not just like see, but I could build it because I could build it now and I couldn't build it before, therefore I must build. Because that was only one consideration that we brought in to the build versus buy equation. And I think in particular people who are earlier in their careers, who are excited about the possibilities of AI, who haven't had the chance to build as many things throughout their career and then have to own them after they build them, those types of talented individuals tend to be more excited about building new things. And it's incumbent on the people who control the checkbook, who think about the long-term strategy of the organization, to pump the brakes and say, not just AI's here, we can do more, therefore do more, but but AI is here, which means we can do more, but we're still bottlenecked by our talent and by our attention. So we need to be selective about what we do and what we choose to own in-house versus what we want, external vendors to own, because we can't own everything. We can't maintain everything. And, to your point about the iron triangle and people thinking it breaks, it's just, all you're doing if you build everything is just shift the costs into the future. Now, maybe that's somebody else's problem and that's your outlook. But, for me and for the people we advise, I try not to take that outlook.
Yeah. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on this in the context of, I was reading an article earlier today about the kind of cost of compute, cost of AI, and how all of these tools that we're now using like Claude and ChatGPT, obviously the pricing is heavily subsidized. I read something where it was like power users of Claude, they're paying $20 a month for their subscription, but actually they're costing Claude like $200 a month, or whatever the number is. And that there's going to be some sort of reckoning some point in the future where once you've got all the users into the building and they're all starting to develop and build their workflows and internal tooling in your platform, and you've got them, you can then hike the price way up and they really don't have any choice but to pay it, lest their businesses suddenly grind to a halt. And so I'm curious for your kind of take on that. Is that like a genuine fear that those of us who decide to try and build at least something internally should have? How would you be thinking about that?
I think it's maybe overblown as a concern because the competitive pressures of the foundation model marketplace are such that, there's more than one provider, so they can always cost cut each other. And then there's open source models as well, which means that if the open source models continue to improve and like continue to approach foundation capabilities, then there's always sort of like the next entrant and the next entrant and the next entrant that can just become the hosting provider for all of these, open weights, open source models that are out there, and they're reasonably capable. They are not as capable as the very frontier labs have. And really what the frontier labs are doing right now, and I think it's the right thing to be doing, is they're building a market. When obviously Uber is the comp that people use when they say like, then the prices got jacked up and look what happened. But, Uber was building a new market. They were proving that market could exist. And here Uber is years later, still good businesses, still used by lots of people. It is more expensive, but ultimately they're providing a service that provides value to people. So I think it's going to be a little bit of a tug of war, but ultimately these tools will continue to provide value far into the future. I think really the question is, how long can, these big billion-dollar investors continue to finance new R&D that drives the frontier forward? Or like, are we roughly at more of an incremental improvement phase of the models? Now, that's sacrilege to anybody listening to this podcast who comes from a foundation model company. How dare you question the exponential singularity that we're undergoing right now, where you're like, but to me it remains an open question as to whether that frontier will continue to grow. I think ultimately you should use the tools that you have right now to get as far as you can at a price point that is reasonable to you. And then even if you have to slow down your building later, or you're just using open weight models to help identify an issue and then maintain it later, the capabilities are here for the foreseeable future. And I think that, between the foundation model companies becoming more efficient and the competitive pressures that they have going on, it's probably not going to be an issue in terms of you're going to be vendor locked in because, they have your data. That's what I think is really the vendor lock in, is that they have your data, but you're not going to be any more vendor locked in than you are to any of the other, platform providers that are already in your business, giving you something that's, of value to your company.
That's a wrap on this one. If you've been thinking about whether your own expertise sits in a world where AI can approximate the output, but not always the outcome, hopefully this gave you a few useful frames to work with. The 3 questions that Ross opened with are worth keeping. Can the client verify it? Can you recover it if it goes wrong? And does it compound into something that lasts? If the answer to any of those is no, that's probably still where you want a human with real skin in the game involved. Next episode is coming in the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, if Eventual Consistency is useful to you, share it with someone who's wrestling with the same questions. And if you want to get in touch with the Cordine team, you can find them at cordine.com. That's CORRDYN.com. See you next time.